Great pleasure to be with all of you today for this webinar on the meaning of Agile. So, welcome to all. I'll start with a very slightly slow introduction, just to allow everyone to join, because I see the numbers still significantly and quickly going up. So we've got a fantastic attendance from China, Thailand, Saudi Arabia, Algeria, and most of the European countries today. So really nice to have all of you with us for this webinar. And beginning of the year, I thought it would be interesting to come back and to start discussing the meaning of this word that we tend to see everywhere these days, which is the word agile. I'm Hervé Legendre. I'm working for EIPM. I'm the research director, and I'm also one of the professor and coach in our academic programs for companies, but also for individuals who join our open programs. Hey, why don't we start with a little survey? So the idea really is to, get you started, involved, trying to look into this world, agile. So the idea is for you to, fill in this short questionnaire, trying to understand, according to your view, what is it that we mean by agile. Where is the survey? Oh, it's here. Frederic is today with me to help facilitate the meeting. Have we launched the? Yeah, I can see some people are starting to fill in the survey. All great. So I'll give you a few more minutes. A few more seconds, and when I'll see that the bar is not progressing further in terms of input from everyone, I'll stop, because some of you might be on mobile. That might be a bit more challenging. So let's see. But this is progressing. So pick your three answers. Nice to see some well-known names. Happy to see some people like Alex or Alexandro. Have not Berna from Finland. Quite nice to see people coming back and joining again for these sessions. Great. Morning, Alex. Always nice to see you here. So I think, no, it's still going up. It's still going up. Going up. Fred, is it you who's stopping at some point the input? Okay. Yeah, it's still going up. We had like 5% more in the past few seconds. Hello, Thierry. Good morning, and Heinz. I think we're stabilizing now, so maybe we can just stop for now. 80% suddenly. Wow. Probably a slight lag. Ready, Fred, if you've got the result? So, what do we have? Helping the business change its course of action when needed. So that's number one. in terms of your pick. Select the right method depending on the goals. Okay, interesting. And then we have running project as iterative loop that bring you closer to the solution. Delivering category strategy that can developing category strategy that deliver a mix of objective. As an individual, contribute to very different projects and delivering RFQ in shorter amount of time. So really interesting because this is a much more strategic view than very often people would be having in terms of bringing agile to procurement, where they would have very often a more process view of what agile means. But I'll be trying to during the session today to pick on all these dimensions. I'll start with a little bit about the foundation of agile, then taking the more strategic perspective on it, then an operational one, and then an individual one to close. Probably the first message I would like to share with you is what we mean by agile is not really something new. If you go back to the 50s, the 60s, you already had a number of scholars who'd been studied management, who had been describing organization being sometimes mechanistic, hierarchically organized with very prescribed type of work, and other organization being more organic, being able to respond to turbulent environment. It wasn't called agile at that time. There was this word organic that was used, but this was already a lot of talk during the 60s and 70s on this type of topic. The word agile started to appear a few years ago. It was very much about opposing a certain way of developing software, which was the waterfall model, where you plan everything from day one, and then you bring a sequence of development one after the other, and opposing it to a more iterative way of developing software, of building features on top of each other, and not starting from a perfect plan that would be executed in the perfect way. And there was the manifesto for agile software development that really brought, I would say, agile into the mainstream, focusing on individuals, interactions, and not on process and tools, working software over the documentation on how to use it, customer collaboration, and not contract negotiation, responding to change as opposed to following a plan. After a while, there was also someone from IBM who developed the Cinefin model. And basically, the Cinefin model is not saying that agile is superior to the waterfall or organic is superior to mechanic. This is simply saying that depending of some environmental aspects, you will need to work in very different way. If you are in the obvious world, well, basically, you can have, according to a situation, course of action A, B, or C, and then you're going to pick the relevant ones. In a complicated world, this is the world of expert. So expert, they analyze the situation, they break down the problem into sub-problem, they gather some information, and they propose an optimum solutions. In a complex world, this is typically a world where you need to start to develop a number of things in order to be able to iteratively improve, develop, and build a more complex system. And the chaotic world is really something totally disconnected, where you will have a purely, experimental, exploratory type of approach for things. And very often the challenge in business is to be able to, just to pick the right approach. When do we need to rely on an expert? When do we need to experiment? When do we need to, totally separate an activity for exploration? And when do we need simply to have, a few options and pick the one that makes sense depending of the context? And classically, Agile has been presented as methodology that would fit well the complex world. But the people who developed the Cinefin model have always been saying that, hey, this is not a panacea, this is not something that you need to use in all circumstances. So let me go first into the strategic perspective, and I'm going to refer back to a book that was published something like 20 years ago by Yves Dawes from INSEAD and Mikko Kosonen, who was the strategy director of Nokia. And that book had a bit of a sad story. It was really an excellent book in terms of understanding strategic agility. But because the one of the author was the strategy director of Nokia, there's been a lot of kind of a challenge in terms of, hey guys, you've been writing that book, but what happened to Nokia? Still, for me, this is a really good perspective and trying to understand what makes, from a strategic point of view, an organization agile. And they identified three dimensions. The first one is strategic sensitivity. It's really about taking the time to look at the opportunities, look at what's happening outside, and having some meaningful discussion, debates across the organization of what this means and how can use it. I've tended to see a lot of companies over the past few years who've jumped on very obvious, ways of leveraging digital to, create smart product and things like that. And not enough, really reflecting on all the potential possibilities and where would be the real way to create competitive advantage. So we need a strategic sensitivity. We need to spend time understanding what this or that priority, trend, opportunity is really meaning. From procurement standpoint, meaning that we need to reserve a lot of time in order to have some of these strategic conversation with the business, looking at their plan for the future, opportunity they want to size, to have a deep understanding of what we talk about and avoiding, arriving a bit late and starting to start with some preconceived ideas. And this is a collective effort. The second one is resource fluidity. Organization who can be strategically agile are organization who are good at taking resources out of maybe a more classic way of working, a more exploitative way of working, and putting them on different projects. That's one of the biggest challenge as corporations have been, cut into subunits that are responsible for their profit and loss. There's a tendency to put everyone on projects that are directly and immediately productive. And somehow we see that in procurement. We see procurement organization where everybody has their project and their segment, and they need to deliver savings on their segment. If we want to be strategically agile, we need to be able to pick people out of these, I would say, immediate projects that are delivering productivity on the short term, so they can participate, in the effort that are going to build together with the business some of the projects that are going to make a difference for tomorrow. And there's an important aspect of leadership unity as well, making sure that all these developments, all these new strategic projects of the corporation are not simply built on low-touch type of interactions, but people really spend the time to develop multiple options and scenarios. I think we need to create choice. If we want to be creative, we are not going to work by picking a winning solution from day one. We need to look at multiple options on how to do things. And then we need to quickly, assess them in order to understand which one is going to bring the best fruit for the future. And that's also important in this interaction with the stakeholders, that we don't go there with our own understanding of what best look like, but we take the time with them of thinking, hey, for this project, you want to digitalize this part of our business model. What are the different options? How could we assemble external resources to support this? What would be option one? What would be option two? So having this collective decision making, and after, because it's a collective decision making, a commitment to the outcome. One thing to, for me, that would distinguish the procurement organization that is really strategically agile would be to see in the first slides of the presentation something explaining how procurement is contributing to the three, four, five major strategic project of the company. So instead of having a presentation, saying, well, our goal is to be a business partner. Our goal is to, bring some saving. Our goal is to generate innovation and sustainability. What I would expect from a strategically agile procurement organization would say, hey, the business as a whole has got this target of moving further into this region of the world, and this is how we contribute to it. Our organization, our company as a whole, has, this project of lowering financial breaking points, and this is how we put resources to support that. So changing the perspective. Very often I'm hearing, people from procurement talking about the beauty of alignment, but I'm a bit cynical sometimes, and I think they would love everybody to be aligned on their strategy. And I really think that people in the management team of a procurement group, they need to hone the major company goals, defining, on this priority for the business, this is our contribution, and me being part of that team, I'm going to support this. So less about procurement transformation for the sake of itself, more about the contribution to the vision of the business. And then this ability to take people out of the day-to-day job and putting them on this specific project as a single point of contact for the business in a way of moving things forward. So that would be my first point about the strategic prism and the strategic perspective on it. Another strategic perspective is what I've seen a lot in 2020. We've been going through a year with a lot of turmoil and turbulences. So it was really interesting to be able to see some of the people I was coaching. They were doing projects, they were developing category strategies. And instead of having one category strategy with a single goal, what they've been doing a lot is they've been defining different horizons. So short term, that's what we need to deliver with the contract that we'll be signing. Longer term, midterm, we win in this, and at the same time, we need that. So I think that's a very interesting way. I'm hearing a lot of people saying, the five-stage process strategic, is out of date. Well, maybe it's the way we use them that's out of date. It's not so much, the tools and the fact that this is a five-stage process. I think what's important today is really whenever we look at a category is that we've got this productive conversation together with the business on what are their more pressing needs and expectations for the next 6 months. What would they want? What would be their priority they would like to see addressed within 18 months from the relationship with this supplier? And longer term, what type of problems would really bring value if the supplier were able to solve them? And then being able, when the strategy is being deployed, of sourcing, contractualizing with suppliers that are really able to deliver on these different goals over the horizon. So I think that's, for me, a very strong message. These days, we still need to strategize, plan for the future, come up with options depending on the situation, scenarios. But what's important for me is to be clear together with the business. What are the horizons we need to take into account, and what is it that we would be expecting along this horizon? Pretty simple in some ways, but really important to be able to find that balance between the immediacy of the urgency and the longer term benefits that we want to have. So still having a vision, but being able to navigate in the right way toward that vision, we can bring that into our category strategies. And I think this is one element that brings agility into the way we work within procurement. Now let me go into the operational perspective. So, well, this is the extract of, this is the picture from the book I've been writing together with Bernard Gracia on fifth generation purchasing. And what was our key message? And it was launched a year ago. What was the key message of the book? The book is saying one of the most important dimensions to take into consideration these days is really to look at the pace of change. The pace of change on the customer side. How often the final user, the client, how often the stakeholders need novelty into, their processes, their product, their business model, their ways of working. So what is the pace we need to have in bringing that novelty to our stakeholders and customers? And on the other axis, really understanding what is the pace of change on the supply side. How fast, turmoils, problems, opportunities will be popping up on this side. So you might have a situation where you're buying the same raw materials day in, day out. But, there's a lot, the pace of change on the supply side is huge because, there's a new sector who's suddenly buying a lot. There's a country who's stopping exportation of some product. And therefore, you need to work in a certain mode. You need to go deep into the supply network. You need to understand what's happening maybe with a tier 5, tier 6 supplier in order to understand. And from one country to another, you might need to implement different ways of gathering intelligence. While in other situations, you might be in a context where you're working on the marketing spend and different countries have different needs and the patterns of the consumers are different, so that calls for different tools. And you need to know very well your existing pool of suppliers, all their capabilities, and make sure you can extract the most value out of this by picking in the best tools at the right time and anticipating, all of these capabilities so they can be delivered to the business whenever required. So that's typically, you see here between this position and that position, it's a very different way of working in terms of who you talk to, how you look at the market, how you look at the needs of the business. This is very different. And being agile is being able to understand when we need to work in this mode, that mode, and to switch. If you're looking after the marketing and the sales type of procurement, you are going to be working around all of these dimensions. So I think this is an important aspect. We need to be able to change gear. We need to be able to change pace and assemble ways of working that will be different depending of the pace of change on the user side and the pace of change on the supply side. Another way of, and this is still part of the book that I have here, which was released not long ago. We have one of this picture, and here to describe different practices, we looked at what are we trying to access? Are we looking for product service? Are we looking for capabilities? Are we looking for IDs? Okay. If you want some innovation, you're not looking for a supplier who can deliver 100% quality-free product. You're looking for a company who's got unique capabilities, but that might not be refined well enough so you can embed it into your product. You want an uncut diamond. So you're looking for capabilities you can refine, assembles, bring into what you have in order to create something unique. And maybe sometime you'll just be, fishing for ideas in terms of, what could be done, what would be the option for the future. And that might be coming from existing supplier, but there are circumstances where in a traditional industry, when we start looking at Internet of Things, digitalizing some of the business, putting a lot of data on the infrastructure, we might have to work with unfamiliar players. That might be a research center, that might be a startup, that might be another type of company that's very different from ours. And depending of this, the way to go to market to get access to information could be very different. Here, if we're looking at product service for existing supplier, RFP, RFI could be the right way to go. If we're looking for new ideas, new capabilities from existing supplier, they would be willing to come to your site, have 1 or 2 days innovation workshops where cross-functional teams from both companies can look at problems and potential solutions and, come up with a number of potential paths that you might be, picking into the future. If you're really looking for a new capability with unfamiliar player, like, we've got all this data, but we don't know how to use it, well, the best way is not going to be to qualify from your knowledge a supplier. It might be to put the data on a repository and tell a lot of company, you have 2 weeks, show us what you can do with the data, show us what you can bring out of it. Huh? And then you might have even situation where you're throwing like a message in a bottle to the wider sea in terms of using innovation platforms. Here is the problem, who's got some solution for it. So important aspect here is, depending on the situation, being agile means using different way of getting access to information from the external world, from external resource, and thinking in terms of what is it that we need, and thinking in terms of from whom we need that, will dictate a little bit what are the right vehicles to get access. And you might be able to move from one hand to another rapidly in order to understand what is the best to deliver this element. So that's another perspective that I wanted to share. Sticking to the operational aspect, some time ago we had another webinar, and we've been publishing an article with Andressa. I don't know if Andressa is here. She's registered for this morning and afternoon, so I don't know if she's with us today. But we've put together, so it was part of a project she was doing for the EIPM certification. She was working for Capgemini, now she's working for Heineken. And the challenge was the following one. How could you deliver a vendor selection for, it was a software as a service for HR. How can you deliver that in 8 to 10 weeks instead of taking much longer? And this wasn't just buying something off the shelf where we have a full understanding. There was novelty. There were new players. There were new practices. The HR world was evolving, and there were new opportunities. And the idea was to find a process, an agile vendor selection process. So this was organized by her as a very collaborative way of working, bringing together all the stakeholders, having some session all together, instead of developing in-depth description of what are the specifications. They've been asking users about their pain point, about what they like, what they don't like, having some of their reactions to existing solutions, and conveying the voice of the user directly to a number of suppliers who were invited in a call to have a reaction. And then all the suppliers, 4 of them, came together into the same building for 2 days. There were plenary sessions where people from the company, the HR director, the people from procurement, from GDPR team, legal team, were passing some of their expectations. Then each of the supplier, they were working on a proof of concept, doing some demos, but also having discussions about, contractual aspect, IT aspect, integration into systems, and things like that. So all this process of collecting information about the supplier, about qualifying the supplier, actually took place in the same building with four suppliers who were having different rooms over 2 days. And at the end of the 2 days, the supplier delivered a presentation with an offer, not in front of the other, but independently of the other. And then there was a rapid process of selecting the supplier. So this wasn't about changing as such the vendor selection process. There were somehow the same gates and stages in terms of ensuring compliance, but the way of doing it as a team, collectively, and bringing everyone in the same place, looking at the pains and gains on the user, and not just describing long specifications, was really a way to turn that into one loop of an agile selection process. And in other cases, it's possible to have multiple loop. A first loop to collect information about the market, and then a second loop of 6 to 12 weeks in order to finalize the selection. That works pretty well for situations where you have novelty, so not something that's a commodity, but where there is some novelty on the market, and where the risks are not too excessive. So if you have, of course, a situation where there will be a transfer of human resource of people from your company to your supplier, this is not going to be managed in an agile way. You'll be using more of the waterfall model, where you will be really planning things very cautiously and making sure that all risk and legal constraints are taken into account. So that's a way of really bringing, if you want, the vendor selection process into your into an agile mode. And there's companies in automotive, and I've been working in aerospace and defense, where even for hardware, there's been some process to do just that. And if you've been following the news, it's interesting to see how the SpaceX and the experiments that have been going on recently are part of this agile way of developing not simply software, but also these big rockets. Let me go into another dimension. I'm hearing a lot of people talking about agile in relation to digital. So, how do I understand that? Well, I think if we look at procurement, and we try to think about it as a stack, as an infrastructure stack. So as layers of resources that are used in order to manage some information. So at the bottom, you've got the data. After, you've got different ways of getting access to the data. You will probably have an ERP system, an e-procurement software that will serve as a backbone of everything you do. And then you will have the possibility of adding on top of it a number of modules. Maybe you will have a layer that allow you to manage all of your procurement project and all our RFQs. Maybe you'll be able to plug in platforms, aggregators, everything you need to have all the catalogs, but also immediate access to the ones of some of the supplier. You might have, for sustainability point of view, or for other aspects, ways of connecting with external database to get access to supplier scoring, and and so on and so on. You can plug some additional element in terms of contract management and deployment, in terms of risk, in terms of CO2 footprint, in terms of costing, and so on and so on. And in many ways, what happened here is the more you build your digital procurement stack, the more you're going to be accumulating data that are interconnected, And the easier it will be whenever there's a new situation by having an extra layer, maybe a business intelligence tool, or by programming in Python on top of it, the possibility of creating an immediate type of additional feature that is going to help you solve a problem. So in biology, this is what we call um, exaptation. So this is a process by which we have features that can be repurposed to do something new. Because we've got all this data accumulated, suddenly we can make connection and we can, for instance, identify small suppliers that we wouldn't be usually screening and send using information coming from external sources, sending them a survey, and very quickly building some form of a stress test to understand their financial situation. So we reuse some of the resource for a different purpose, and we can plug and play, connect and assembles new functionalities very quick. Feathers of birds. First, this was about thermal regulation. After they've been repurposed to, attract a partner in order to mate, and then finally, it's only after millions of years they've been used for flying and helping with the flight of birds. So digital resources, for instance, allow you to be agile because it's a cumulative process. You've got all these resources. You've got this openness in terms of getting access rapidly to information through some APIs that allow you to quickly repurpose what you have to do something different. So I think that's also a way of being agile these days, and we've seen that happening during the COVID period, where organizations have been able to very quickly, if they had a good digital backbone, they were really good at quickly screening with each of their countries, business unit, all the contracts and what was at stake in order to recalibrate some of the spend, for instance, on the very short term. This is not something you might be doing on a day-to-day basis, but the system suddenly can be repurposed very quickly to deliver just that. Okay, so I think that's where digital and agile are meeting and bringing value to each other. What's interesting here, it's very systematic. So it's not about experimenting, but because you're very systematic, everything is well organized, you've got your data cleaned, then suddenly you're able to create additional value by creating, additional features that deliver some good stuff. Finally, the people side. I don't have a lot to say here. I think there's been a tendency in the procurement field to say, what are the new skills? What are the new skills? So we need people, we can do finance, we can do costing, we can interact with internal stakeholders, with suppliers, we can manage relationship, we can have critical thinking, we can develop a strategy. I mean, the list is already very long. So when we talk about being agile, I think what's important is more about behaviors and some of the leadership skills and the ability to operate in very different environment. So this is a framework, that was developed by Korn Ferry, but there's also other frameworks on learning agility. And we see some of the characteristics of individual, the extent to which an individual know his or her true strengths and weaknesses, the ability to look at problem in unique and unusual ways. Skilled communicator who can work with very diverse type of people. People who like to experiment. Okay, we don't try to get it right, the one plan that's going to deliver the full, but we go for experimenting, we go for testing ideas, we are trying something to get some feedback, and then being comfortable with, the change and saying, well, this didn't work very well. Maybe we need to add that to the plan, or maybe we change this. And people who have track record of delivering results even in uncertain situation. So I think what's important, for instance, is, if you're a CPO of an organization, if you're managing a number of people, is really to, to understand who your people are, who are the good citizens that are going to be excellent in terms of operating in certain modes, and who are the people who have some of these capabilities and who enjoy the novelty. We have that knack and curiosity for experimentation, novelty, diversity, and then making the best combination of people. We are too mercenary-like of trying to have, one segment, one person. Maybe we should have like a pool of projects for a broader segment, and then using people based on their skills. If people have more of this learning agility, but also if some people are, the good solid citizens that deliver the value by, operating the more classic ways of gaining access to market information and gaining access to supplier, leveraging that in the best possible way. So I think that's really the key message, I wanted to share with you today. Whenever we talk about the word agile, for me, it's not just about, the way of working at Spotify, or some process aspects of being able to go quick to market, or just being iterative, in a way of working. I think there's different dimensions to it. Strategically, how we can help the business change course of actions, change direction. How do we really align with the priorities and the external opportunities? So we need to have this 360 view of market, of the business, of what happened, and have deep, meaningful conversation to help, this kind of support with a few key dimensions happening. And probably, it's not about multiplying the number of strategic goals, but making sure we understand the few key strategic project of the business where we can make a difference and free resources to support them. From an operational point of view, I think we need to see ourselves as a network of people, as a reservoir of outstanding skills that can deliver different type of results. And then we need to be able to put people in the right project in order to deliver the right result. We need to be able to get out of, the RFP machines in order to gain access to information through different practices, modes that are fit with the degree of uncertainty, the complexity, the speed of change on the supply and the demand side. And finally, people, we need to further develop and cultivate this spirit of experimentation, of reflecting on our strengths and weaknesses individually, and cultivating this interest for working with very diverse people. And I think that's something we don't make happen just by training people. We do that, we help people move on with this, but it's all the interaction inside the organization that are important. Making sure we share practices, we organize, internal competition, that we create a network that really learn from each other, and not simply, a central management of strategies and results, but creating this kind of learning organization where, someone from who's been buying software is sharing experience with someone who's buying hardware on how you can make that in an iterative and agile way, and people thinking little by little out of the box by the influence of other around them. This is great for innovation. This is also great for turbulent time like the one we're facing these days. And I think, I'm all for agile, as long as it doesn't mean, like a last minute rush, but having a structured way of looking at strategy, operational flexibility, and leveraging some of these capabilities that people have to go beyond the obvious. Thanks a lot for being with us this morning. I hope this pers- perspectives with an S, different views about Agile have been useful to you. I tried every time to, share some of the background ideas, but also to provide some practical suggestions. Very much looking forward to hear from you. You can send me emails, you can react. Of course, if you have questions, I'll be happy to answer them or start some discussion. And I see one coming from Laszlo. Procurement globalization bring a strategy rigidity, global versus local, and delivery speed decrease from procurement. In many industries, the business change happen fast. Local business would require real agility from procurement. Even a global plan strategy would require other priorities. How do we see that procurement organization? CPOs are reacting to such expectation to remain and be successful? Well, I think uh, uh, very often what we do is at some point we perform an analysis and we do the analysis with a Pareto logic. And we end up saying, well, at the end of the day, if it's good for 80%, this will be good for everyone. So I think first is we need to log the assumptions when we take some decisions about what we do local, global, where do we release and allow local to do differently from the global, how do we, what type of diversity we've got in the portfolio. So this type of decisions, they need to be they're based on some assumptions. The first point is to regularly revisit these assumptions, really understanding are they valid, not valid, do we challenge them. The second one is also to make sure that we are careful about the Pareto logic. It might be critical for a certain country that maybe has a low spend but that's developing fast, that we deliver still outstanding value today by maybe having a different approach than for another country. So this is really about we need to create common denominator across the globe, but it doesn't mean that the common denominator needs to be the unique solution for anyone. So that's really important, I think, to find a balance. A strategy is a basis for implementation where we listen to weak signals and we should be able to allow for some deviation. If we are purely managed from, hey, you can only have, two suppliers globally and that's it because the goal is the supplier list and the number of supplier, we're not going to be able to make that happen. We need to find, together with the diversity of the business situation, the right portfolio that's going to optimize different objectives and goals. And that can't just be, all about savings or transaction cost efficiencies. There's other dimension we need to bring to the picture. Would you expect that the procurement AI development would enter also in bringing data to procurement to move act more agile? I'm using, I think I would talk about digital tools in general. I think we've been learning from the COVID period that digital backbones are fundamental. So we need to have our activities covered end to end by some infrastructure that really help to get the basics done. And then, we can add some element on top. And if this is an API that gives you an interface that gives you access to external data, that's fine. And maybe this is the external supplier who's mining information using AI and deliver that to you in terms of risk. You might not need to do that inside your own stack. Maybe if this is purely of having something that helps you to visualize, some of your spend, some of your contract, the degree of deployment, It's not so much about AI, it's simply about visualization tools. So I think, let's use the right technology when it makes sense. Very many times, it's good if it's coming from the supplier, if we don't have to bring in it ourselves in the process. And, if AI, blockchain, whatever of this technology is useful, then why not? But I think, we'll do something on AI and open source this year, because we need to understand better, how these infrastructure and these supply chain for digital are working. I think, we see only the tip of the iceberg. Rashna Aurora, thanks for explaining the different layers of agility that can be adopted in procurement. I love the word layers. That's a really good point. All very relevant how we can organize the organization model to enable balanced agility in all three layers. I think, well, that really depends of the first aspect is, understanding the business structure, understanding the business structure in terms of, the line of forces from a geographic point of view, from a business point of view, from a centralization point of view. You will not run an automotive company like you might be running a cooperative food company with multiple units across the world. So the first point is really to find the balance in terms of mirroring. Then the second element is not so much structural, is much more creating the degree of freedom, releasing time of people to be able to be part of the right conversation, having the right discussion in order to be able to work on the right thing. Taking out people out of day to day so they can experiment with a new way of sourcing, or they can experiment in terms of bringing some novelty to the business. So this is not a structural aspect. This is just a CPO decision of saying, I'm ready to take 5-10% of my resources, allocate them full-time, part-time to other aspects. And I'm paying a lot of attention, not just on, passing information on the tools and systems, but also making sure that, people who are working in this part of the world for this type of this business are sharing their knowledge, their experience with others, and that we are also expanding in terms of the network together with the stakeholder to create mutual learning that are not, from the center feeding the individuals, but creating this mutual reinforcement across. And there's plenty of ways of creating a vibrant community of buyers. Huh? This can be a short session where people can show a case in 5-10 minutes. I think the biggest challenge is to make sure that everybody gets back on a good understanding of what is a problem-solving story, and be able to explain in 7 minutes what was the problem, how we approached it, how we found the solution, what can I learn about it. If in your company, every buyer is trained to do that, and on a regular basis, people come together and share, and this is also done, extended to the business, you will create the diffusion of knowledge, a change of culture that can really help to bring these differences to reality. So not just structural, but also, being able to put resources in different jobs rapidly, and then having that culture that helps infuse this exchange of practice and knowledge across. The Agile was really applied into the chip shortage that is happening right now in automotive industry? If not, what will be your assessment? Well, I think that's, thank you, Sergio, for that question. I think, we need to really understand what's happening in the semiconductor world. I mean, this is an industry that's really operating like raw materials where you have, mining activities. So investments are huge, and therefore the cycle of price versus the cycle on investment is a bit wild. And today we are in a situation where there haven't been a lot of investment for some time, and the demand is picking up. And also we've got a multiplication of processors that will be specific, domain specific. So before we could have like general processing unit that were able to do a lot of the things, and now we've got more and more diversity. So the constraint and the longer term constraints are really impressive here. And being agile in terms of managing the demand, your inventory, might not be sufficient in the current context. I think we are out of what can be purely managed by, supply chain practices. There will be a lot of increase of prices, a lot of short-term reactions, and hopefully what we will be seeing is some investment going up into increasing the capacity. But this is not something that happens fast. We can create capacity quickly for mask, but semiconductor, that's not the same story. I'm not an expert in that field. I know some people who are, so if you want, just give me a shout and I'll try to connect you with the right people. Agility doesn't conflict, Nordin, with process-oriented organization, does it? Ha ha ha! I love that question. The origin of process management. Taishi Ono. This is about Toyota. Taishi Ono. If the procedure is the same from 1 month to another, something goes wrong. So the logic at the origin of the process management school of thought was that a process is not here to constrain, to never change, to be gelled, but is a living process that needs to be continuously improved. And in some ways, potentially, if there's different ways of doing things, considering which one is the best. I think there's been a move from that intelligent way of looking at process, seeing at the basis for improvement, and not trying to make everything as a white box where everything is described into depths, but allowing for gray box where we know the input and the output, and after, in between, do what you want. We've been moving to a situation where all of this is constrained by a workflow where you're obliged to go through this and that. And that's, the version of process I don't like. And I think what's important is to get back to what are the key compliance aspects we need to take into account and how much freedom we have in between. So I think we've got much more freedom than we think, but it's just that we repeat the same ways of working one after the other, and then we're losing this ability to look outside of the box. And yeah, I really like, Nordin, your point, these questions about, being agile process. So process needs to evolve if we want to be agile. That's part of the logic. So Nadia Meister, Agile is connected to change, to digital transformation in procurement. What about adding lean to agile procurement, your thought? Wow, well, okay, that's so again, if you look at people into the field of supply chain, they will tend to try to distinguish lean supply chain versus agile supply chain. And the people who are really behind lean will tell you that this is all stupid and this is not the way it is. So there's a lot of different school of thoughts and different perspective on these aspects. And recently, there's also been some people that have been putting together the two words, lead agile procurement, and have been developing process to sort things rapidly. What is the spirit behind lean? The spirit behind lean is about the customer, is about delivering maximum value and eliminating maximum of waste for the end customer. And it is about empowering everyone across the organization to deliver just this. So if you just stick to that vision of the world And if you think of an iterative process where you're really trying to learn fast in order to deliver something that's aligned with some changing environment, there's a perfect fit between lean and agile. If lean in your organization becomes, we are going to analyze in depth a process, set up what is the one best way to do it, a la Mr. Taylor or Ford, because lean has been used a lot for this, and you need to follow that process. And at the same time, you still need to show that you're agile. That wouldn't work. So yeah, you can have these two, but you need to align it on the mindset, and you need to align it on the principle, because you know the I always go back to Plato, and Plato had this pharmacon. Every remedy ends up being a poison. So very often we pick some good elements, but we take them to an extreme, we bring them when they don't fit, and we're creating negative things. So we need to have the right, touch of lean, agile, whatever you want, at the right place at the right time, and not just turn that into a unique way of running the whole thing and deteriorating, turning the remedy into a poison in the end. Yes, Rashna, agree with you. For me, this is a three dimension, and I like the way you use the word vision. I'm really concerned about people talking all the time about my purchasing transformation. I think we are here to contribute to the company vision, to the company purpose. We are not just, doing purpose by our own, or doing, transformation by our own. Thank you, Sunny. Design thinking and agility in procurement. I have a special section. I've done something on design thinking. Yeah. If you want, I'm going to stay a bit. So goodbye to everybody who wants to go. Um, so design thinking is really this process of demonstrating empathy, being able to understand the pain point of the user, uh, identifying multiple ways of solving this pain point, working on prototypes that are helping you to learn, and from this, iterating till you find the right solutions. Okay. So basically, if you go into this kind of a perspective, you can implement, if you're here somehow a little bit in the middle, you can have a design thinking way of doing your market consultation, like I've described with this agile way. Instead of coming up with detailed specification, you share the user's perspective, or you put suppliers in front of users who are explaining what works, what doesn't work for them. And from this, you don't ask them to come up with one solution, you ask them to come up with 3, 4 concepts. Then the first loop, you look at all these 3, 4 concepts, and you say, hey, I got back with my user, we like this one, that one, and that one. So here is the new package. Hey, supplier, do you want to go a step further? And then, prepare some costing or the different alternative at the right time. So instead of thinking your RFP process as beginning to end, a long process, a one-time consultation, you can use design thinking to make it like a series of loops where you go from high uncertainty to lower uncertainty, and every time you pick what is the best way. So yes, you can do that. But this is I don't see enough of this. Goodbye, Florent. Goodbye, everyone. I've been going beyond 4 minutes. Hey, get in touch, ask questions. I'm learning and I'm developing new things because I get questions. And sometimes, this framework, the one I've shown that's now making the book, it was someone who asked me the question, how digital IoT is going to impact the organization of procurement. So, that got me to start thinking about this. Thanks a lot. Have a great day. It was really a pleasure to be able to share some of these reflection. Having these meetings also forces me to, put some of the thoughts into the picture. Looking forward to some feedback from you. Have a great day. Bye-bye. And if you like it, get the book.